we have a lot of conversations and necessary conversations about language and how we talk about people of all kinds of identities. And I think when we're looking at history and we're looking at movements and we're looking at the ways that communities have existed throughout time and in different contexts, it's so important to understand the thinking and the practices around the language that was used at the time, in part because it is important that those of us who are alive right now, which is currently the farthest, the most advanced the world has ever been, we have to have enough humility to understand that our language will also continue to change and evolve.
Right.
And the things that we consider acceptable may not be considered acceptable in 5 or 10 years.
Welcome to The Stacks, a podcast about books and the people who read them. I'm your host, Tracy Thomas, and today is The Stacks Book Club Day. I am joined by Michele Norris, who has come back to the podcast to discuss our pick for September, The Lilac People by Milo Todd. The book is about a trans man named Bertie and his partner, Sophie, who are navigating post-World War II Germany when an unexpected visitor arrives from a concentration camp nearby. Today, Denne and I discuss the ways that language is ever evolving. We talk about the importance of historical fiction and the telling of stories, especially those about people who have often been erased. And we dig into some of the writerly choices that Milo Todd makes with his characters. There are spoilers on today's episode. Make sure you listen until the end of the episode to find out what our October book club pick will be. Everything we talk about on each episode of The Stacks can be found in the link in the show notes. If you like The Stacks, if you want more of it, bookish content, hot takes, community, virtual book clubs, consider joining the Stacks Pack on Patreon and subscribing to my newsletter, Unstacked, on Substack. Each of these places offer different perks. Plus, you get to know by supporting my work, you make it possible for me to make this show every single week. Head to patreon.com/thestacks to join the Stacks Pack and check out my newsletter at tracythomas.substack.com. Now it's time for my conversation about The Lilac People with Michele Norris. All right, everybody, I'm so excited. I am joined again today by author, editor, overall outstanding literary citizen, Michele Norris. Welcome back to The Stacks.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be doing this book club episode. It's going to be super fun.
I'm so excited. So the book we're talking about today is The Lilac People by Milo Todd. The book came out this year. And let me just say this from the top, because somebody wrote a mean comment to me. There will be spoilers in this episode. There will be spoilers, okay? So if you haven't read the book, that's totally fine. Either stop listening or enjoy the spoilers. But don't come yell at me on Spotify comments, okay?
No,
I don't appreciate it.
No. I think it's really hard to have a really great conversation about a book without spoilers. I know why people do it, but it's an interesting thing as a writer because I am unconcerned with spoilers as a reader.
Oh, okay.
And I always have been. When I was a kid, I would go to the book fair at school sometimes, and I would flip to the back of the book because I wanted to see how it ended before I chose whether or not I was going to buy it.
Oh my gosh. See, okay, I hate a spoiler. So I am extremely spoiler conscious. But when we do book club, the deal is that there are spoilers. And since this is a novel, there will be spoilers. When it's nonfiction, I don't care that much. So spoilers. Let me give folks sort of the quick plot summary of the book or plot intro of the book, and then we'll dive right in. So The Lilac People takes place in 1930s and 1940s Germany. There's sort of a dual timeline. For those of you paying attention, you probably know what was happening in Germany around that time. Our main character is a man named Bertie, and he is a trans man who is in a long-term sort of marriage type relationship with a woman named Sophie. Sophie and Bertie we don't know how, we don't know what happened, but we know they have escaped Berlin, and they are living on a farm in Ulm. They've got another identity. We don't really know what's going on with them, but we know that they are lovers. We know that they were in Berlin in the 30s, and now they're still alive, still, sexual, bad guys, according to the Germans, according to the Nazis. They're living life on the run as a trans man and his wife.
Yeah.
So fill in the dots. And then a small boy man shows up in their backyard. We find out his name is Carl. We find out that he is also a trans man. And then we get going. I mean, that's sort of the setup of the book. Mm-hmm. Who's Carl? How did Bertie and Sophie get out of Berlin? How are they still alive? Why didn't the Nazis find them? And what the fuck is going on? In the 1945 timeline, which is where we meet Carl, the Americans have come to liberate the camps. And we find out basically at the top of the book, everyone's free except homosexuals and sexual, what's the word I'm looking for? There's like a word for, sexual deviants. That's what I'm looking for. Yeah. So that includes the trans people. So everyone else is free. But you know what laws we're going to keep in place as the liberators? We're going to keep the laws the Nazis had about like gay people and trans people. But otherwise, if you're a murderer, roam free. You know, proud to be an American.
Yep.
So, Den, we always sort of start here with the book club episodes. Overall, what did you think of the Lilac people?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I really, really loved it. I found it to be incredibly engrossing. I'm not always into historical novels, to be perfectly honest. I'm just so preoccupied with like more contemporary life. But here I found the writing to be just beautifully executed, and everything about the setting and the descriptions really just like pulled me into this world and this time. I just found it to be absolutely gorgeous. It was really interesting to read this novel as a trans person at this time in this country. It felt prescient in an almost creepy way. And I kept thinking about the trans author who wrote this book, Milo Todd. And I kept thinking a lot about the impact of writing this book and doing the intense amount of research that had to be done to execute this book when we're living in a time that feels, you know, eerily similar, when it feels like this kind of conversation, like we might be on the brink of like, you know, dealing with trans people in the way that they're dealt with in this book. It was also just beautiful to learn about the history of trans folks in Nazi Germany. You know, I've always heard about it, but I've never really known much about it.
Yeah.
So this book did that, but it did it in a way that felt like it was a piece of art, like a beautiful piece of literature. Like it did everything for me that a novel is supposed to do.
Yeah. So I have, I think, slightly more mixed feelings than you, but generally very positive. Like generally, I think this is a really good book. I also am not a huge historical fiction person. And unfortunately for Milo Todd, I think I am very much a World War II, specifically Nazi Germany person. Like I've read so many nonfiction books in this place, like the camp that they talk about, Dachau. I've been there. Like I was just there actually last year. And, you know, my mother's Jewish, so I was raised with so much of this history as something that was important for me to know about. And so as a person who reads so much nonfiction, while I did learn a ton, some of the stuff I was like, okay, like everybody knows this, which I know is a me problem. Like I know that everybody doesn't know this, which is why I'm like, unfortunately for Milo Todd, he wrote a book for a person, like for me to read and be like, well, I knew that already because I'm a know-it-all. But I did really like it. And I thought I would feel more like I wish I was just reading a nonfiction book about this, which is usually how I feel when I read historical fiction. I'm just like, I want to, but I think because of, you know, we find out later in the book about the fire and the burning of all these records and all of this, that that doesn't exist. Like there are pieces of this history that exist, but there are not like a lot of stories that we're going to get about what it was like to be alive. And so I think that I really enjoyed that piece of sort of, I was able to let go of some of my, you know, actually little bits. Like there's a few historical things where I was like, well, that's actually not how it went. And then I read the author's note and I was like, oh, okay. Like, whatever. But I did really like it. And then like on a novel side, I did think some of it felt heavy-handed to me, like a little didactic, a little bit like, I'm going to really make sure you understand the connections to now. And I appreciated it. Like some of the most beautiful writing were in those sections, but I also was a little bit like, do we need this? And I want to talk about that because I think audience is really interesting for a book like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a historical fiction novel about trans people coming out in 2025 when there's so much like anti-trans rhetoric and not just rhetoric, but also like laws and legislation being, all this stuff going on. How much, should a trans author be driving the point home of like, hey, feels like Nazi Germany? I don't know if you have thoughts about that.
I have sort of evolving thoughts about it. And I have thoughts about it in reference to this book specifically, but also sort of other books in general. It's interesting. I feel like we are at a moment in time where we have kind of earned the heavy-handed art.
Yeah.
And by that, I think what I mean is that if we have been more subtle in the past, it has not worked. It has not gotten us where we needed to be.
Sure.
And I sort of feel like I don't know what's left. I think it was really interesting for me. In the middle of the book, there's a section where, so throughout the book is like divided into sections, like mainly part 1, part 2, part 3, but then of course there's chapters. And in certain places throughout the book, you'll get a note in like italics that is like communication, like this is what's happening to trans people at this moment. That's like, it's
like
almost
newspaper.
Yes, they're like newspaper clippings, announcements or whatever. But you can, as you read them, you can tell that they're being circulated like in
like
sort
underground,
of subversive ways.
Yeah, yes, underground news getting passed to the like within the community.
Yes, exactly. In the ways in which they can do it best without being surveilled. And there's this section in the middle of the book where there's a bunch of them in a row, and they're just getting worse and worse and worse. And the last one talks about Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld, who's a character in the book and a real life person who ran the sort of Institute of Human Sexuality in Germany that was kind of at the forefront of so much of the conversation around sexuality and gender identity. And it says he's the most, I forget exactly what it says, but it basically says he's the most dangerous Jew in all of Germany, like at this time. And, and he's been performing, or working with providers to perform like gender reassignment surgeries and supporting people and educating the community. And I just thought about even just the rhetoric that we've heard in the last few days, in response to the killing of Charlie Kirk, like there are people on the far right who are talking about how trans people are the most dangerous people in America and how trans people are a terrorist group, which is like an escalation from what we were hearing 3 months ago, 6 months ago. And that was so eerily weird and prescient. And I just was like, we have to be heavy-handed. Yeah. But even if we are heavy-handed, at this point, what is it doing? Is it going to do enough?
Yeah. I also feel like what's interesting about a book like this is like, those people aren't going to read it.
Right.
And that's what's hard is it's like, well, I don't need Milo Todd to be heavy-handed with me. I need Milo Todd to be heavy-handed with old boy over there on Fox News, right? And like that's the thing that's so frustrating about like art sometimes is it's like I hear what you're saying and I agree with you. So like I don't need the lecture today, but I understand why it's there because to your point, like people need it. And I think there are probably people in between me and old boy on Fox News or whoever who are reading this book who are like connecting dots for the first time, which is again why I said like some of the issues I have with this book are just because this is a piece of history that I really love and have read about, So I think like my own biases coming in, not even biases, but just like interests coming in. Like I knew that, like, I think a lot of people didn't know that there were trans people having reassignment surgeries in the 30s. And like, I did know that, So like, I think just some of those pieces, it's hard. I think Milo Todd has an extremely hard job of balancing all of his knowledge because he knows way more obviously than me. Like he's done all of this research and balancing, the art of storytelling, which I think he does really beautifully in this book, and also making a point, like this book, as all books are, is political. And I think it feels even more political right now, though I think it probably would feel political in any time. I think that's what's so enduring about what happened in Nazi Germany is that so many groups can see themselves in the plight of the queer community there, the Jewish community there, you know, the political dissidents. Like there's so many ways in to understanding what happened and seeing those parallels, which is why I think it comes up all the time, because it is not, you know, by any means the only atrocity or genocide that's ever been experienced. Like, so there's something extremely compelling about this one that has like an invitation for other people, like to see it as a cautionary tale. Whether they take the lessons or not is another question.
Well, I think part of it is that, you know, there are so many people that were targeted and so many communities that were targeted. And this is perhaps in some ways, you know, I don't know if this is the right word, but a virtue of this happening or beginning really in Germany, of that being the locus, and other parts of the world, when there are genocides, in ways it seems as though the people involved are more homogenous. Mm-hmm. And so it's just like an easy point of access, I think, for so many people, which I think is really interesting. Like I'm similar to you. I've known for a long time that there were people who were having reassignment surgeries done at that point. I've certainly known about Magnus Hirschfeld probably since I was in high school, certainly at the very least college. And so there was a lot of information that I was familiar with too, but there was also getting to read about it in a sort of dramatized way, I think was really interesting and really helpful for me because, you know, so little of the history is written about in this way, is fictionalized, you know, getting to be in the head of the characters. You know, for me, this felt like ultimately I would consider it a character-driven novel, even though it has these other elements that are really strong. And so for me, that was the way in that I often haven't always had the chance to just experience.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I think for so many people, even if they know, you know, trans people have existed for way before 1930s, also like way before.
Yeah.
Maybe, you know, since the beginning of time. Like, we're not saying this is the beginning. Yes. But I think a book like this that foregrounds that story and is backed by history does something more than a story that is just set in another time that features trans characters, right? Like it's rooted in something that makes it much harder to dismiss, right? And I think Milo Todd with his author's note, which honestly, like one of my favorite parts of the book, because I'm a nonfiction girly, I love an author's note. I loved seeing what he changed to fit, what he kept the same. Like I thought that was so cool. And for those of you who listened on audio, the author's note is not in the audiobook. So I know I literally, I was gagged when I found out.
I had like, no idea.
No idea. It's like, just read those lines. Anyways. But I thought, so one of the things that comes up in the author's note that I thought was so fascinating, it's talking about Hirschfeld and the center and the fire that happens that is dramatized in the book, where all the files and the papers are burned and so much is lost. And Milo Todd says, like, these images of the fires and the burning have been distributed in books and movies like all over the world, talking about what the Nazis were doing to free speech and like what the Nazis were doing. And Milo Todd notes, but pretty much none of those mention what was actually being burned. And I thought that was so interesting in the ways that we can tell these stories, but completely erase what was being targeted, right? It's like, so then it makes it easy for people to believe that it was just political dissidents or that it was just, you know, maybe it was like the Torah or something. It's like, there's no Jewish papers or just generally books they didn't like. But it's like, no, these were the files and the stories of people in the LGBTQ community, though that is, I think they're posthumously named that. I don't think that's what we were calling it then. The inverts and the transvestites, which are the language of the book, which Milo Todd is like, this is the language of the book. Don't you guys do that, okay? Which I loved.
Yes.
In the,
and the
like,
language
beginning.
of the time.
Yeah, he's like, this is the language of the time. We're not doing transvestite otherwise, okay? Thanks so much. So I did think that was interesting, like that the loss of everything is featured, but not actually what is lost. Yeah,
like you don't, you know, I knew about that fire. I understood what the Institute was doing on a very broad level, but I also had never really like looked into it further. And so reading it dramatized in this way, it filled in that picture for me. And that was really interesting and really important and sort of was a moment. I have these moments a lot with things that are media that is more historical than what I'm typically encountering, where I'm like, oh, I sort of thought I knew about this. because I know a few details or I know a few basic facts, but I don't actually know about this. Like I don't know the details. It's not tangible in my mind like I think it is. And so that was a really exciting and really interesting part of it. And just to have it all be kind of on the table in that way. I also want to say, I also appreciated that sort of author's note in the beginning where Milo Todd talks about the language, because I think, we have a lot of conversations and necessary conversations about language and how we talk about people of all kinds of identities. And I think when we're looking at history and we're looking at movements and we're looking at the ways that communities have existed throughout time and in different contexts, it's so important to understand the thinking and the practices around the language that was used at the time, and to not only look at it through a lens of what is acceptable today, in part because it is important that those of us who are alive right now, which is currently the farthest, the most advanced the world has ever been, we have to have enough humility to understand that our language will also continue to change and evolve.
Right.
And the things that we consider acceptable may not be considered acceptable in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, that's such a good point, right? That this is all an ever-evolving situation. I think that's why some people get really mad when people want to take the N word out of books or something, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
Yeah.
But then, I always think also like, not just going back, right, to the language of the history, but like when a word shouldn't be used in the present and you use it. Like I'm always fascinated by how the N word shows up in books now. Like sometimes in the audiobook, they'll bleep it or like, I'm like, but was it written in the text or like, did you put an act? Like, I'm curious about how, especially white authors obviously are navigating that. Okay, let's kind of dive in. We're going to keep talking about like a lot of pieces of the book, but let's kind of dive into the plot. And there's some other things I want to slide in as we go. So as I mentioned, the book opens with Bertie and Sophie. They're in Ulm, which is outside of Berlin. I don't know. It's in Germany. They're on a farm, famously growing asparagus. Okay. They are growing asparagus. You need to know that. I need to know that. We're all going to know that together. And a person appears. He smells bad. He's maybe dead. We don't know. Find out it's Carl, our sweet Carl. They bring Carl in. They find out that Carl had been at the camps, and they find out what they had already known from the newspaper clipping, which is that the Americans have liberated the camps. They've let everybody go, but not the inverts, which are homosexuals, and not the transvestites, or as it's also referred to, pink triangles, which were for homosexuals, and then black triangles were for all sorts of sort of bad people according to the Nazis. So that included like political dissidents, that included transvestites, as the book is called. I want to say, I'm going to say trans people. I don't like saying transvestites.
I know it's like gross. Uncomfortable, like to say it. I said it a few times as I was reading it. I was like, I don't know how I feel about saying this right now.
Yeah, I don't love it. I'm not loving it. So I'm going to say trans people.
Yeah.
But in the book, I'm going to just say what I say, I guess. But just know that if I say transvestite, I'm not liking it. It's not comfortable. But so the black triangle includes a lot of people. So what we find out is as they're kind of liberating the camps, they're sifting through the lists and they're trying to figure out, why are you a black triangle? Are you trans, or are you just other nefarious? I think the black triangle also includes like people who were unhoused at the time, like so it includes a wide swath of people who are not clearly fitting in the other categories, like Jewish, Roma, pink triangle, etc. And what's important, just a historical piece, which is brought up in the book, but I don't think people understand this about Dachau. I didn't really quite know this, but because Dachau is one of the earliest concentration camps or work camps, whatever, language of the time, it had a very low percentage of Jewish people.
Yep.
So
I didn't know that.
So it had mostly black triangles. It was a heavy black triangle. It also had a lot of like Catholic priests and like religious people who were speaking out against what the Nazis were doing early on. So a lot of people who are at Dachau were not Jewish. That is not the case for most of the camps, especially the camps later on that are further outside of Germany. But a lot of the camps in Germany, because this little history lesson. A lot of the camps in Germany didn't have as many Jews as you'd think. Also, the number of Jewish Germans who were killed is far lower than you would think because many Jewish Germans left. They'd had time to leave. They saw what was happening, the writing on the wall. So the number of actual, Jews that were killed in Germany, who were German, who were killed, is lower. I mean, I can't remember the exact number, but when I found out the number, I was like, wait, what? Like, it didn't click to me. The Polish Jews suffered extreme amounts of loss because they invaded. They didn't have time. They didn't know it was coming. And so you see the numbers reflected by country in a really interesting and different way. So anyways, we find out that Karl had been at Dachau. And then we kind of flash back to the 1930s. We meet, I guess Bertie asks Karl if he knows like his friends. Then we flash back. We see them at this nightclub. They're having a great time. We get to see Sophie and Bertie meet. We get to meet Bertie's best friend, Gert, and his other two friends, but mostly Gert. And we sort of get to see this like really beautiful nightclub scene of pre-Nazi takeover. And I think these scenes are really interesting and really important, again, for what we were talking about before of like, it wasn't always looked at in the same way. Like there were these, they called them transvestite cards that you could get, and it would prove that you were like an approved trans person, and like they couldn't arrest you.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just so fascinating. I mean, obviously, like nobody should have to show their papers, but the fact that there was even this lane that was like, there's an acceptable way to be here sort of goes against so much, I think, of how we talk about trans people now, of like this new thing. And like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's wild. And one of the things that drives me the most crazy in any conversation about transness that goes beyond like being an internal conversation is this idea that transness is new. And it's like, no, our language that we use today is relatively new, but like we have been here forever. And for me, what was really interesting about those chapters, because I learned a lot too, was I had this sense, and I thought about this, and I first thought about this when we were presented with the black triangle as opposed to the pink triangle. But I almost had this sense that in some ways, it felt like being trans at that time in that society was perhaps more acceptable even than just being gay, which is very different kind of than the way that it feels right now. And I don't know enough to know if that's really true, but I kind of got the impression that might be the case, and that it might have been, partly a result, partly maybe not understanding what transness was and what to do with folks, but more that like there was a way that you could just sort of blend in to that version of society. And there's a section where Bertie kind of talks about this when you're in his head as the reader, and that for gay men and lesbians, again, I'm using today's language, that was not, they weren't seen as being able to blend into sort of normal society in that way. And that was just really, really interesting to me.
Right. Like it was like, if you want to conform, we can make space for you to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like, if you're going to be, same sex, like we can't hide it. We can't assimilate that into anything. I also got that sense because there is that section where they're talking about, I think it's Karl and Bertie, and Karl's like, I like men. So I'm sort of both. Right. And it's also like, dealing with the language of not having the language to talk about like gender and sexuality as like these two separate things. I mean, I think they had the language to do it and they probably were doing it, but that like on the outside of the community, there was no language for that. Like there was no way to be like, my sexuality is this and my gender is this. And like, but I do get that sense. I also thought maybe they were in a separate group because there just weren't as many. And so they kind of lumped everybody together who was like extra in the black triangle. But it did feel like there was a way to be acceptable trans as opposed to there was no option to like kind of work around. for homosexuals.
Yeah, that ability to blend in.
Yeah, which becomes so important in Nazi Germany for a lot of people, right? Like the question becomes, are you going to be who you are, or are you going to be safe? Right?
Yeah.
Like, are you going to choose like your truth? I mean, I think there's a line in the book. I have a note on it, but it's like, we have to be who we are not in order to be who we are.
Yes. Yes.
And it's very much that. I mean, that happens very early in the book. Let's take a quick break.
Okay.
And then we'll be right back. We'll continue with the plot. Valentine's Day is upon us, and I've got love on the brain. Love for books. Duh, of course. Hello. Did you forget what podcast you're listening to? I love bringing you all great reads, exclusive author interviews, and behind the scenes book gossip. But I can only do that with your support over on Patreon and Substack. Our Stacks Patreon community, also known as the Stacks Pack, is where you can go for book club meetups, a private, very active Discord, and a year-long mega reading challenge to help you achieve all your reading goals. Plus, you also get that monthly bonus episode. Now, over on the Substack, you can subscribe to my newsletter, Unstacked, where I keep the book conversations going. I also give you a healthy dose of sports and pop culture, definitely some hot takes happening over there. And again, that bonus episode. If you don't have a few dollars to spare, don't worry. There are free options on the Substack and the Patreon to get you a little extra Stacks magic. Making this podcast is a total team effort, and by supporting my Patreon and my Substack, you allow me to support my amazing team that makes the show possible every single week. So if you or your friends are looking to meet other book lovers and support this indie podcast, come hang out with me on Patreon, Substack, or both. I would love to have you. And since we're talking about love, you can gift subscriptions to the Patreon and the Substack for that special reader in your life. For the Stacks Pack, head to patreon.com/thestacks. And for the newsletter, head to tracythomas.substack.com. And also, there are links to both in the show notes. Okay, see you in the Stacks. We're back, onward in the story. So we find out that perhaps there's some world in which maybe Carl has crossed paths with Gert. We don't know. Carl's traumatized. Bertie and Sophie are trying not to be rude hosts. They're hiding Carl. And then we get the American, dun, 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 Officer Schweikopf, Ward. He comes in. He's like, hey. Oh, and Bertie and Sophie have fake names. They've taken the names of the people whose farm they're on, the Baumans. We know. So what we know is that Gert's last name is Bauman, and we know that they've taken Bauman, but we're not exactly sure. We're at this point, we're kind of piecing it all together, but we're not sure who's who, why, how do we get Bauman, whatever. Ward comes up and he's like, hey, Baumans, so you guys are Nazis because obviously you're still alive and you're still in Germany. So we're going to need you to come to our little work camp and we'll see you in a few weeks. And they're like, well, we got to leave. So they start to try to figure out, there's this boat. It's going from Stuttgart. It goes to Amsterdam. Like, maybe we can make this happen. They don't know. A few days later, here comes Ward again. He's like, knock, knock, knock. Hello, Nazis. It's me, Ward. Come with me. They do a march. They go to a camp. They are like, you're all Nazis, and look at what you did. You guys are sick. We hate you. We're going to ruin your life. We're doing reparations. We'll see you in a week. At this time, Bertie he is overcome by what he's seen. He is so unhappy. He doesn't know how to admit that he's not a Nazi without exposing that he is trans. Right. He's in this situation because if he exposes that means he's got to go to jail. Yep. Don't want to do that. But also, if he has to pretend to be a Nazi, he has to pretend to be a Nazi. Doesn't want to do that. Oh, and they have this nosy neighbor, Frau Bear. Very, very nosy. She's in their biz. We're not sure what her deal is. We think she's onto them, but we don't know. We're going to find out later. At the camp, they find there's like all these artifacts. And one of them is a hat, a cap. And Bertie's convinced it belongs to Gert, his best friend, and sort of like, they like fuck around a little bit. You know, they mess around. They're young. They're in their 20s or whatever. They're just like, they're hooking up, but they're also like hooking up with other people, you know, doing their shit. But he loves Gert. And we keep getting this thing of like, I feel so bad about what happened to Gert. Like, I'm to blame. But we don't know why yet. We're just like, what did you do?
Yeah.
What did you do?
Yeah.
We see the cap. We get the cap. Distraught. Everyone is distraught about the cap. Sophie's like, no, it's not his hat. I tend to agree with Sophie, right? Like, it could be anybody's hat, right?
Yeah.
We go home. I'm kind of skipping through some of the stuff. I'm trying to like just move the pace a little bit.
Yeah.
It could be his hat. It could be anybody's hat. I don't know whose hat. We go back home. Finally, I'm skipping a little bit, but just go with me here. We get back to the house. Finally, it's time for Carl to tell us what's going on. Carl, we need a reveal. At this point, we get this in the book, in the text, we get this one massive paragraph. It's like 4 pages long, and Carl tells his story. It is as bleak as you would imagine a story of a trans person who is a child, basically. I believe he's 16 when he gets taken to Dachau, would be. It includes sexual exploitation and like basically sex slavery. It includes loss, abuse, all of the things. What did you make of this section?
That was a difficult section to read.
Yeah.
It felt necessary to me, partly because I tend to defer to like the author's choices and instincts. But it was one of those moments, and perhaps because I'm in community with this author, I just kept thinking, man, God, what was it like to write this? So I kept thinking about the experience of writing it. But for me, I found it to be necessary and intense. One of my minor gripes with the novel is that I did feel as though in some of these moments that sometimes come off as heavy-handed or more dramatic, the writing was executed in a way that felt sometimes heavy-handed, I guess, to use the earlier language. And this was one of the moments where I was like, this is so intense. And the way that it's written, the way that it's crafted, the way that we experience Gert telling this story as readers is all like very clearly done in order to give us a certain emotional reaction. And I also was like, I'm not sure I needed all of that to give me that reaction. Like it's very, very intense, but it also felt necessary for the reader. It felt necessary to me for the characters to get that insight and to get, throughout the novel at this point, that Carl is holding back, and we don't know exactly what he's holding back. And so I think in some ways it's also a moment of catharsis for the reader and for the characters. And perhaps most importantly for Carl to take this load that he's been carrying and give it to Sophie and to Bertie and to give it to the reader. And perhaps the most important thing I was thinking as I was moving through the rest of the book is that the reader needs to carry some of that load. Yeah.
So I also, I struggled with this part a little bit because I don't know. I think I understand why Milo Todd did it in this way of like this one big paragraph, this one big just like information drop on us so that it really drives the point home. I think there is another way that it could have been trickled out information, like less just like a drop and more of like a steady stream.
Yeah.
I don't know that the impact on the reader or the impact on Bertie and Sophie's characters is as profound or is as dramatic in the stream way.
Yeah.
And I think, the way that it's written, like as a paragraph, like one big paragraph, clearly like marks Milo Todd saying like, this is important, this is different, like this is a thing. And so I did appreciate that of being like, this is a thing. But I don't know. Like, I don't know if sometimes the trauma of all of the stuff kind of starts to wash over you a little bit because it's just so much. Like even now, like, I mean, I just read this section yesterday and I'm already like, wait, how many people were abusing? Like, who was it? I know it started with the SS officer, but then there was this, like, it's like some of it starts to get muddied because I couldn't quite take it all in.
Yeah.
But I'm also so glad it was written out and not sort of just implied, because I think the specific trauma of trans people and of homosexuals in these camps is different than the stories that we often get from other groups, right?
Yes.
Like that and I think another thing that people don't always understand about the camps is like there were so many hierarchies within the camps of like, you know, people who were there, who were taken there, who were incarcerated there, if that's the right word, who were then in charge of other people who were there. And so like there's these different hierarchies. And like, so we get some of that in this section that I think is so important to like reiterate to people. And that stuff I thought was like important to be there and was done in a way that didn't feel too, like it was like, you're learning something, but like, you're not like, I'm teaching you something. I mean, I think one of the craziest things of Carl's story is that he was in Dachau for 11 years. And there were maybe not a handful, but there were a good chunk of people who were there for a really long time because again, until the very end, it was not supposed to be like one of the extermination camps. It was because it didn't have a lot of Jews. So it was really more like a jail, especially in the beginning. Later on, as tides changed in the war, et cetera, it did become that. Actually, a fact that's not in the book is that Dachau actually closed for like 2 years in the middle because they had to like renovate it to make more space for people. So I was curious if that was going to be referenced because I'm pretty sure everyone had to leave the camp, or most people did. But because it's one of the oldest camps, they were like, oh, infrastructure, like we got to make better beds. Like they changed the bed layout. Anyways, but there were a lot of people who survived for an extremely long time. Also at Dachau, they had a soccer league. It was like one of the quote unquote nicer camps, again, because they didn't have Jewish people. So there was some feeling, or they didn't have as many. There was some feeling among the Nazis of like, these people are like, just should be in jail and have their lives ruined this way as opposed to being killed. But like, it's sort of like an outlier camp compared to like something like, let's say Auschwitz, right?
Right.
But it's just so interesting. Like I didn't know all of those details till I went, but like I was definitely like, oh, nobody ever talks about like these camps. Yeah.
I mean, they don't. I knew nothing about this camp. I had heard of it, but I knew nothing about it. So all of this information in the book was new to me. And it was really, I just kept thinking about the choice that authors make. And I'm thinking about that now because I think sometimes when you get like a big information dump, part of it is to sort of heighten the drama. But also, I think there's a way in which it might be perceived as being kinder to the reader because it's like, I'm just going to give it to you in one fell swoop and then you can move through it. But on the other hand, it is perhaps, I think it is sort of more impactful than if, or more dramatically impactful, I'll say, than if it was just sort of, sprinkled throughout the text. And the truth is that like, one thing that I talk about as a writer is like, I'm very interested in the idea of like being compassionate to readers and sort of making a reader feel safe when they're in my pages. And I don't know how, Milo Todd feels about that or how any other writer necessarily feels about that. But that is part of what guides like the way that I make these choices. And I would be interested to better understand how Milo interacts with thinking about the reader beyond just a craft point.
Right.
In terms of trying to choreograph what you can choreograph of a reader's experience.
Right. That's so interesting. I don't ever think about that because I'm not a writer, but I think it's interesting to think that writers are thinking about that. At the end of Carl's monologue, Bertie, so sensitive, is like, okay, but what happened to Gert? Like, Bertie, could you say sorry? Like, could you please be a human? Like this boy has just told you all the horrible things that happened to him for 11 years and he escapes and he like comes here and he lands on your land and you're like, but again, do you know what happened to my friend? But have you seen my actual friend?
I actually laughed out loud.
And then
in that moment.
Carl's like, you bitch, you already know he's dead. I was like, dang. You did ask for it like that, though, Birdie. If you had just waited and been like, would you like a hug? Maybe you could have gotten a gentler release.
Yeah.
So then we find out Gert is dead. Birdie doesn't want to believe it. Sometimes Birdie was pissing me off. I'm just like, okay, babe. Hope is a powerful
out here
drug.
being a man. Okay.
Yeah. I was like Birdie, you are truly. Then, I mean, like the next big thing that sort of happens in the book is that we kind of get this now flashback to 1933, right before the fire. And Birdie sort of lets us in on, oh, by the way, right before all this happened, this like kid showed up and was like, hey, would love to get my papers. And Birdie's like, oh, sorry, we don't do that. And the kid's like, but you do these like other two papers. And Birdie's like, yeah, we'll try. Great. Fills out the form. The kid leaves. Birdie sits down at his desk. And then he hears like, you know, down with Hirschfeld, like, get him. It's very Beauty and the Beast, like, kill the beast. Birdie's like, uh-oh, let me take my file. Let me just burn this really quick. And then let me get out of here. That's what he does. We find out that this young person who has shown up is, of course, Carl. Carl has filled out the form to get the paperwork that is needed to be a legal trans person, attempting to do that. Birdie leaves his file and everyone else's file on his desk after burning his own. He runs out. The Nazis come in. They collect all the files. They get everybody's name.
Yep.
Birdie, I understand. This is a traumatic. I'm not going to judge Birdie for this because honestly, like, yes, it's selfish, but also you're just like, what the fuck do I do? They're outside the gates. You know, like I understand not being like, oh, I should take all the files or I should burn all the files. Like I understand how that's an in retrospect moment for you. After knowing what you know 12 years later, like, yeah, would have been smart. Do you feel like, do you have strong feelings about what Birdie did? Do you feel like, you know, Birdie should be in jail? Like, what do you think about Birdie's choices?
So this is really interesting. This was a complicated moment for me because it really got me thinking about community and the ways in which we do and don't show up for community and the ways we do and don't protect ourselves, sometimes at the cost of community or vice versa. And, you know, I had to remind myself that first and foremost, the problem is always the aggressors, the ones that are trying to do harm. That is all. But I had to remind myself of that, right? Like I had to be like, girl, you know, don't forget. And I certainly understood how Gertie could forget, or not forget, but could neglect to do that in that moment. I cannot imagine being in that moment and having the presence of mind necessarily to think about it on that level. But at the same time, it's like not much of a stretch because he thought about it for himself. So like he could have done it for everyone. So there was a little bit of judgment. There was a little bit of, this is what you could have, like, here's how you could have tried to step up for everyone. But I thought about myself in that situation. And I feel like for me, like I always get nervous because sometimes I might think, okay, this is what I should do, but how do I know that me making this choice isn't going to fuck things up for everyone else in the future?
Correct.
Maybe it's better for me to leave something as it is. And I am often tempted to be sort of deferential in that way. Yeah. And I imagine that in that moment, I would have been like, we don't know what's coming. We don't know what's going to happen. I know that this is going to happen, but maybe it won't be so bad. Or maybe I might set people up to be fucked up worse if I burn these records. Maybe people will need them. And I could see myself and I could see someone being really torn in that moment when they have to make a split-second decision.
Yeah. Same. I also am just like, if I'm Birdie, I'm thinking they're burning everything. They're going to burn the whole place down. I'm not thinking they're going to stop and collect our record. I mean, I guess I am a little bit because I do burn my own, but I don't know. I think because one of my issues with the book a little bit is that I feel like too much hinged on us like being upset with Birdie or like seeing the
Mm-hmm.
flaws in Birdie
Mm-hmm.
because of this moment. And to me, I just felt
Yeah.
like, I don't know, like I don't think what he did was that bad because I don't think he thought it through. I don't think he had time. Like, I don't think he was
Yeah.
maliciously, it wasn't like he was like, here's 2 files, take this one and kept to himself, right? Like he didn't
Mm-hmm.
know what the next thing was. And
Yeah.
it was such an uncertain time. And so I have sympathy or empathy for the decision that he made. And I almost wish, like, bigger picture, that more of the characters were flawed in a more deep way. Like I almost
Mm-hmm.
wish that Birdie had actually done something that was like purposefully harmful, because I felt like this book could have been richer if it had a little bit more like pull
Yeah.
morally, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we get into the conversation of like later when he's talking about, or in this section where he's talking about Dr. Hirschfeld and like, his eugenic stuff ended up in the hands of the Nazis. And like,
Mm-hmm.
I wish there was more of that kind of like very clearly oppositional forces in the characters. Like I didn't feel like Sophie, she didn't have any flaws. She was just lovely. She was teaching piano. Like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I felt like Carl obviously was so pure, but also so was Gert. And it was just like, there was too many people who were too pure for me, like from like a story standpoint, and like, I
Yeah.
understand why you don't want to villainize a bunch of trans and queer people, but I also felt like a little bit that was sort of I think what Milo Todd was trying to do with the book, like trying to be like, we're all complicit. If you survived this, you did something that is not great, whether you felt like you had to or you wanted to do it. Like, to survive the atrocities of war, people have to do things that are fucked up outside of wartime.
Yeah, I agree. And I really do. Like I felt, first of all, I felt that the earlier half of the first half of the book was setting us up to have a moment where we saw Bertie do something that we might object to. And I just think it's really hard to object to this scenario. And then for him to blame himself because of it, like, it just opens your heart to him. And you're just like, oh my God, like you should not be carrying guilt because of this. And so I also would have been very interested to see Bertie do something that I felt like legitimately causes guilt, especially because, to your point, in order to survive this regime, for the years that they did, it almost feels like you would have to. And a reader would still be tempted to forgive something horrible for the sake of survival. And so that would be like a more sort of interesting choice. And I certainly agreed about Sophie, where I was like, she was like the picture perfect ally.
Yeah.
And wife. And I was like, what about the fears that she would have? What about having any fears around like being associated with this? It was interesting. Right. We're not in Sophie's point of view. So we don't know what her internal life really is, but there are ways to show that through Bertie's eyes.
Right. Like even them just getting in a fight where she's like, well, what about me? Like something like that, where it's just like, oh, maybe she's a little bit more selfish than we are seeing. Yeah. So, okay. So this all is revealed to us. There's this whole thing about like the Institute inspiring the Nazis. And like, there's this great line that it's sort of like talking about the trick of identity politics, which is that visibility without protection only leads to violence. And I think for me, reading this book right now in the United States, I think that was really like highlight, lesson of the book.
Yeah.
Like I think Milo really like snapped with that one, like that's the line to me. Like if you take one line from this book, for me, that was it. And there's this whole speech that precedes this that's about canaries in the coal mine. This was where I was a little bit like, okay, it's a little on the nose. And in the author's note, Milo Todd says like, I wrote that speech. That is not Hirschfeld. Like I wrote this speech. And I'm curious what you make of like Milo Todd showing his hand in this way. Not only does he write it, but he also calls out that he wrote it in the author's note, which he certainly didn't have to because he never presented any of the other dialogue as anything other than fabrication. So I'm curious what you make of this choice of like, hi, it's me, Milo, telling you about canaries and coal mines and vulnerable people.
It's interesting. I part of me found it sort of admirable, just the transparency of it. One thing that I'll say, I felt like this part of the spirit behind this book was a spirit of, as a writer, of transparency, in terms of, how the book was written, why the book was written, many of the choices that were made in the book. And so I admired that. And I also admired that because for me, the characterization of Hirschfeld felt very complicated. Like he might have felt for me like the most complicated character through the book, given what we know about him. And Milo also addressed this in the author's note when he's like, well, we see him through Bertie's eyes. But also Hirschfeld was all of these things. So I think ultimately I thought it was admirable. I did not think it was necessary. I think I would have come away from that moment feeling the same way, even if that had not been there. I would have assumed like that was, purely born of Milo's imagination.
Yeah. And I think like that section, the canary in the coal mine thing, to me, that just felt like such a 2025 moment. Not because it's not like historically correct or whatever, but because it feels like what I hear trans people saying, especially Black trans women saying over and over of like, the Trump administration is trying things out on us. Like, I feel like I've heard that articulated so much in the last few years that reading it in the book, I just was like, oh, this is from 2025. Like that was a section of the book where I was like, that feels like today. Now, granted, that could probably have been in the book 10 years ago and still have been the same sort of thing, like the author writing it. But reading it today, it just felt like it almost took me out of the book a little bit because I was like, okay, I get it. Then Ward comes back. We're back in 1945. Ward comes back and he's like, hey, Bertie, I actually know your real name and I know who the fuck you are. We found your records because you worked at the Institute. So even though you burned your file, we figured it out, which is what Gert had told Bertie when they have this like big conversation about what had just happened. Gert's like, well, babe, you're dumb because you're in other records, but congrats to you. Now we're all going to die. Let's go to my parents' house or my grandparents' house. Ward's like, I figured out who you are. Bertie runs away, tries to like escape, goes to Frau Bear's house. We find out Frau Bear's shady neighbor, not sure what's going on. Guess what she is? She's Jewish. She's not Bear, she's Bear. Different spelling. Doesn't sound great when I say it out loud, but she's a different kind of bear. She tells the Allies or the Americans, and they're like, great. Don't come to the work camp. Sorry to bother you. Love you, mean it. So she's able to sort of hide Bertie. She finds out that Bertie is trans and she's like, oh, just like the Bauman's grandson. Like, what a nice boy he was. And then we carry on our way. Everybody meets back up in Stuttgart. They get on the boat. They go to Amsterdam. Not a big deal. Ward tries to catch them as they're leaving but not caught. And then on the boat to America, they meet a friendly Nazi because what else is a World War II book without at least one friendly Nazi, you know? Carl cannot handle talking to the Nazi. Bertie's just trying to play it cool. He's like, I'll be nice to the Nazi. Not going to say thank you to the Nazi. No matter what happens, not going to say thank you. That was so relatable to me because that's how I am. I'm like, I'll talk to you, but I'm never going to say anything nice. Totally me. I was like, Bertie, I see you. Then the friendly Nazi is just trying to make small talk with Carl, goes over to Carl, is like, so, like, you're learning how to play piano. Cool. Like, I love music. And Carl's like, don't talk to me. And he's like, chill out, dude. Like, just love piano. And he's like, don't talk to me. And then the Nazi puts his hand on Carl's back. Carl ends up in the ocean. Yep. Do you think that the Nazi pushed? Or do you think that Carl just was just spiraling, could not handle the situation?
So this is interesting. I felt like Carl was spiraling because the vibes that I was picking up from the friendly Nazi were like, if there was going to be anything more aggressive, it was not going to be in the direction of pushing you off pushing Carl off the boat.
Yeah.
It was going to be pushing Carl into the bed. So
That's what I thought too. Yeah.
So that's what I thought. And I wondered if maybe, thinking back to what Carl expressed about Dachau, I wondered if maybe like Carl had all those same thoughts too and was picking up on it. I wasn't sure, but that was my feeling.
Yeah, totally. So then Sophie dives into the ocean to get Carl, who is now in the ocean. They all work together, including the friendly Nazi and his friendly Nazi friends. Everybody comes back. Happy ending for the Nazis and everybody. Yeah. Birdie's like, I don't want to be friends with the Nazis. They're so nice. Carl's like, that's what makes them terrifying. Yeah. I personally didn't need a friendly Nazi bit. I didn't need it. I understand maybe some people need it, but I also understand the history that like everybody was a Nazi, so some of them were nice. I get it. I didn't need it. I don't, humanizing Nazis is really tough, especially right now. Also, shout out to us for knowing that Ezra Klein fucking sucked when we recorded this earlier.
Girl!
I know. I mean, I've been telling people, I was talking about him saying MAGA, but like.
Yeah. But
I believe we had that. Listen to Black women.
Listen to Black women. I will say it until I blue in the face. But let me tell you, Ta-Nehisi.
He read him for absolute filthy filth. It was the giving
dragging of
dog
the
shit on the bottom of my shoes. I said, Ta-Nehisi finished what Denne and I started.
Yes, he did.
For those of you who don't know what we're talking about, yeah, he's a fan. For those of you who don't know what we're talking about, go back to Denne's first episode on the show because we had a pre-Charlie Kirk dragging of our own. It was mild. It was mild, but it was a lot of hatred. I did get messages from people that were like, I didn't even know who Ezra Klein is. I was like, okay, what does that make you cool? Like, I don't know. I'm too online. Sue me. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Like, we're consuming too much news. I've known who Ezra Klein was for years. So
yes, I'm sorry that I have to know who Ezra Klein is. I can't believe you don't, but congratulations. Here's a check. Anyways, so yeah, I wasn't for the humanizing of Nazis. Don't think we need it. Understand why it's there. Don't think we need it.
Yeah. That was interesting for me. As a writer, I sort of feel like it's so important for us to be able to see the humanity in everyone that is on our pages. And I believe that, and I appreciate that as a reader. But I also, so again, I was like, I feel like I understand why Milo did it. I've had so many narratives that have humanized Nazis that like that's not a lesson that I need to learn, To
me, it was more like, I think because, again, this was another part where it felt heavy-handed. It was like, you could have them have all those interactions. I just don't need I don't need the characters being like, he's actually kind of a nice guy. Like, we get it.
Yeah,
it would have been more nefarious almost to be like, it was unclear. Is he a nice guy or is he not a nice guy? And like, is he showing up to intimidate them or is he like, I would have liked a little more gray area there because I understand what Milo was trying to do. I just was like, I don't need this. I don't need this like, Nazis, they're just like us. Like, I don't know. Not for me.
No, it did not feel necessary. And for me, that's a big thing to admit because I'm kind of all about, that humanization. But I was like, if there's one villain that we're all very well acquainted with, it's Nazis. And of course, they weren't all, completely evil in that way because everyone was a Nazi. So there were some that were friends. Like, it's just,
there was a spectrum. Just like, Nazis are not a monolith,
Yeah.
We need to hold space for them.
We didn't need that. Like, I was so much more interested in like the characterization and the shifts of the Allied soldier Ward than I was in the Nazi. And
he was a fantastic villain. He was like he was a really well rendered villain. And I felt like he did a lot of what happened later with the Nazis. So I just,
it wasn't, and it just wasn't necessary. Like, I agree. I was like, we don't need that. We don't need it.
So here's the end of the book. Everybody makes it to America. They have their forged passports and they go through Ellis Island. Some people are pulled to the side and they're like, you can't come. Some people, like the good Nazis, are sent through. They make it through. Our people are pulled to the side but taken to a special room. They're interrogated a little bit. They are allowed in. They're given new names. This is a historical piece of... This is like a piece of historical fiction that happens a lot where people are like given new names at Ellis Island. But I actually think the real history bears that didn't happen. because of the documentation people needed, that a lot of people retroactively change their names after they arrived to assimilate. So I wasn't sure about this bit. I kind of was like, I read that this isn't real. I understand that people think it happened, and maybe it did happen a little bit, but it didn't happen as much as people believe. Like everyone who's like, oh, my last name's Smith, but it's because we came from Poland and it used to be this. Most of your great-great-grandparents were just like, we don't want to have this Jewish or Polish name because of racism, which I understand. It's like, I don't need to start off on the wrong foot.
Yeah.
Then they go into New York. They show up to Roy's house. I haven't even talked about Roy, but Roy was Gert's American boyfriend. And he was like, if you ever need anything, come find me. I obviously thought Roy was going to be like a serial killer. Turns out Roy's just a lovely, sad boy. Really sad that his boyfriend, Gert, never showed up. And they ride off into the sunset is happy. I mean,
yeah.
The end. Happy ending. Let me ask you this. I know a lot of writers who are trans, who write stories about trans people, are extremely hesitant and resistant to the idea of a not happy ending for trans characters. Yeah. What's your take on this?
This is a really good question. I understand why that hesitation exists.
Same.
And, there are so few trans narratives, and I will say that, I had to think about this with my own novel. I think part of it is that we need to get those stories out there because we want our work to be hopeful for our readers. Yeah. And I think it's really important. I would not have objected to a different ending in this novel. Partly because it's a historical novel. And so I think when the landscape of the story is familiar, I think there's more room and more grace for an ending that's more tragic. I was invested in the characters and so I was happy about their survival. Right. But it was just a little difficult for me to buy entirely as well. Does that make sense? Like it just was, I kind of think it's the next frontier. The next step is to move into, trans stories that are honest about the fact that the ending isn't always happy.
Right. And or like that the trans person could be the villain.
Yeah, the trans person could be the villain. The ending doesn't always have to be happy. And also, an ending that isn't happy doesn't mean that it's an ending that ends in like death, which I think is also part of it, because so much of our stories right now are still about survival.
Yeah, totally. I think, honestly, if it were me, I would have let Carl go in the ocean.
Interesting.
I would have just let Carl go. I would have said, this person did everything they could to survive, and even still, like, it wasn't enough. But I would have let Bertie and Sophie make it. That's what I would have done.
I might have killed off Sophie at some point.
She could have died in the ocean too, honestly.
Yeah, she could have died in the ocean. Like,
I did feel sad when I thought she was going to die in the ocean. I was like, ooh, tough break, both of them. But
I know. You know what I immediately started thinking of? Glee's famous Naya Rivera, who saved her son and then couldn't save herself. And it's almost like I had a flashback, and I was like, is that going to happen to Sophie?
Got it. That would have worked. Yeah. So sad.
But it didn't, it was, there was a way in which the ending felt pat in a way that I was just like, okay, like, know.
Yeah. I understood why it was how it was, but I am famously always rooting for a murder. I always want the most dramatic possible thing to happen, which is not for people to be happy. Like, it's never satisfying to me if people make it out alive or happy or like find love. That's why it's tough for me to read romances. I'm just like, but could you kill each other first on the way out? I just have two more things I want to talk about quickly. One is like, would you watch a movie or TV show of this?
Yeah, absolutely, I would. I think it's perfect. Sure. Yeah, I can see it being a TV show. I mean, maybe a miniseries, but I think it's a phenomenal movie.
It's a great movie. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And then the last thing we always talk about is the title and the cover. The title is The Lilac People. The cover is the back of a man in a field of wheat with some pretty clouds. I think the title is really good. I think the cover's like whatever.
That's so interesting. I love the title and I love the cover. Like
cover.
I think that the cover of my own novel is stunning and gorgeous and beautiful. I had a little bit of cover envy when I saw this cover. I loved it. The colors were so beautiful.
Really?
Yeah. I think I still would
nice.
choose mine. But I loved the colors and the way that they interacted. I loved the sky and the way to interact with that. I like a cover sometimes that's more like a painting. So I actually love the cover. It's one of my favorite covers of the year.
Really?
Yeah,
wow.
But I get why. I just
think it's fine. I just don't.
Yeah.
Like the back of the book, the back cover, which is just like the clouds and the wheat without the man, I respond to more than I think it's just the man. I don't know. It's tough for me.
It's a choice for him to be back, like for us to see his back.
Yeah, and also I'm just like, what is this? It doesn't really tell me much.
No, it doesn't.
Like it doesn't add to the. Like, I don't know. It doesn't make me want to pick up the book and read it. I do like the sky. I think the sky is beautiful. Also, like, shouldn't it be a fucking asparagus field? Like, come on. Give me some stalks of asparagus.
I do love asparagus. It's interesting because I am not necessarily, like, I tend to prefer covers that don't tell you a whole lot about the book. Although I think it's there in a subtle way. But I think I tend to prefer covers that that are not very on the nose.
That makes
for whatever
sense.
reason.
I also think the person on the cover, this feels like a marketing thing to me of like, it's historical fiction. We need to put someone like in a costume on the cover.
Yes.
And I don't respond to that. I don't respond to marketing.
That's true. That is 100% true. That outfit. I mean, it's totally something Bertie would have worn, but it's interesting because like, I sort of feel like that man is supposed to represent a trans masculine man. Yeah. And I don't know that he does, you know?
Right. That's sort of what I mean. Like, I don't feel like it tells us anything about the book. I think if you look at the book, like anything could be in there. And I think if you're putting the man on, you're trying to indicate something to us, but I don't think it indicates enough information to make him necessary. Yeah. But I also don't know what the cover would be. I do think it's beautiful. Like, it's aesthetically pleasing. I like looking at the book, but as far as like, what does the cover communicate to me? It's not a lot.
Yeah, no, it's not a lot, but I don't know. I look at it and my heart just like opens. Like truly, I like it. Just like for me, it is one of my favorite covers of the year. Like it. Just,
okay, well, we're gonna end on that, and I'm just gonna ask listeners at home. Comment on the Instagram post about this episode what you think of the cover. I'm curious to know, like, do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you think it's sort of good but not great? Like, I don't think anybody hates it. I don't think it's like hateable. I think it's objectively like a pretty good one. But tell us what you think. Yeah. Go get Denne's books. She's got 2 out this year. One is the anthology she edited called Both And, which is a collection of essays from trans and gender nonconforming writers of color. And then her debut novel, When the Harvest Comes, which came out earlier this year, is also out for you to read. Read both of them. Denne, thank you so much for being here. This was amazing.
Thank you for having me. This was so, so, so fun. Like, seriously, yay. I just had the best time.
And everyone else, listen to the end of this episode to find out our October book club pick, and then we'll see you in the stacks. All right, y'all, that does it for us today. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you again to Denne Michele Norris for joining the show. Okay, now it's time to announce our October book club pick. It is spooky season. We are finally doing it. We will be reading Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. We'll discuss the book on Wednesday, October 29th, and you can tune in next week to find out who will be joining me for that discussion. If you love this show and you want inside access to it, head to patreon.com/thestacks to join the Stacks Pack and check out my newsletter at tracythomas.substack.com. Make sure you're subscribed to the Stacks wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you're listening through Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave us a rating and a review. For more from the Stacks, follow us on social media at The Stacks Pod on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok, and check out our website at thestackspodcast.com. Today's episode was edited by Christian Duenas with production assistance from Waikia Freelo. Our graphic designer is Robin McCrite, and our theme music is from Tigirigis. The Stacks is created and produced by me, Tracy Thomas.